Drake and Kendrick Lamar, and you sent over this conversation, really dissecting it all, and I gotta say it was fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it gets pretty deep into how people are seeing all this play out. And I think what's really cool is that it goes beyond just the music itself, you know?
Yeah, right? It's like it's tapping into this whole cultural moment we're in right now.
Exactly. And that's what we want to kind of dig into today. What are the big takeaways from all this chatter about Drake and Kendrick? What are the real core insights?
Right, because our listeners, they want to cut through the noise and get right to the heart of it.
Absolutely. So we'll be looking at Drake specifically, his strategies, the choices he's making musically, and even how the whole cultural landscape is shaping how people are interpreting all of this.
Okay, so let's jump right in. One of the things that really struck me in this conversation you shared was how strongly one of the speakers initially reacted to Drake's recent moves. They basically said he was done, like it was over.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty blunt, but what's interesting is the reasoning wasn't really about the music itself, like whether it was good or bad. It was more about this sense that Drake had kind of hit a wall, that his whole formula, the thing that made him so successful might not work anymore.
So it was less about the actual songs and more about like a shift in the game itself.
Right, like the rules had changed, and he was maybe stuck playing by the old rules.
But then the conversation took this interesting turn. They started talking about a potential comeback for Drake, but with a huge caveat.
Yeah, they basically said that if Drake wanted to get back on top, he needed to totally reinvent himself. He'd have to become the bad guy.
Okay, wow, that's pretty drastic. I mean, that's a far cry from the Drake we've come to know.
Right, and they even made these really interesting comparisons. Like they said he'd need to be more like Thanos or 50 Cent.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see what they're getting at. Those are not exactly the nice guys.
Not at all, and that's kind of the point the speaker was making. They were suggesting that maybe there's this growing fatigue with nice culture, like everyone being so polite and politically correct all the time.
Yeah, I can see that maybe people are craving something more raw, more authentic.
Exactly, and they brought up these iconic rivalries from the past, like Prince and Michael Jackson or Mariah Carey and Whitney Houston, where there was this real tension, this open kind of animosity.
Yeah, and those rivalries definitely fueled some amazing music.
For sure, and so the question becomes, can Drake pull that off? Can he tap into that bad guy energy?
Because it's not like he hasn't tried to be a little more confrontational in the past. I mean, there was that whole It Must Be Drake Bell thing online.
Right, and that didn't exactly land the way he probably hoped it would.
It's so interesting how one little misstep online can really color people's perceptions.
Totally, and it makes you realize how important it is for artists to really control their narrative, especially in this day and age.
Okay, so we've got this idea that Drake needs a major image overhaul to stay relevant. But here's the thing. The person who's saying all this, they're actually a Drake fan.
Right, and that's what makes it even more compelling, because they genuinely want to see him succeed, but they're also being realistic about the challenges he's facing.
So they're kind of saying like, look, I'm on your team, Drake, but you got to adapt if you want to keep winning.
And they also made this point that even if Drake does keep winning, it might not look the same as it used to, and that could really affect him, mentally and emotionally.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen how he's reacted in the past when he feels like he's been wronged. He's not afraid to lash out or even take legal action. I mean, remember when he sued iHeart and Universal?
Right, exactly. He's definitely not someone who just lets things slide, and that kind of sensitivity to public perception could play a big role in how all this unfolds.
Okay, so despite all these potential obstacles, this speaker seems to have this unwavering belief in Drake's ultimate success.
Yeah, they were pretty adamant about it. They kept saying things like, Drake is winning, and he's gonna win this.
So where does that confidence come from? I mean, what's the basis for that belief?
Well, a big part of it's just the sheer power of his music. They pointed to No Guidance as an example of a song that just connected with a massive audience.
Yeah, it was a huge hit.
And they also talked about how popular opinion and strategic marketing can really work in his favor. They basically said that Drake has the resources and the fan base to overcome pretty much anything.
That makes sense. But even with all that, they did point to one specific area where they felt like Drake had made a serious mistake strategically.
Yeah, and this was interesting. They said that Drake's biggest blunder was not fully committing to a particular sound or style. They felt like he was trying to do too many things at once, appealing to both the pop crowd and the more hardcore hip-hop fans.
So kind of spreading himself too thin.
Right, and they argued that he had the resources to dominate both lanes. He could have put out a massive pop record and a street banger at the same time and just flooded the market.
And he hesitated.
Yeah, and they attributed that hesitation to arrogance, which was a pretty bold statement.
Wow. So they're basically saying that Drake's ego might actually be his downfall.
In a way, yeah, they're suggesting that his confidence might have led to complacency.
And that brings us to this whole debate about whether Drake actually lost in this exchange with Kendrick. The speaker was very clear that they didn't think he lost at all.
Right, and their argument was pretty simple. They said that if Drake's music is still successful, if people are still listening and connecting with it, then he's winning regardless of what anyone else says.
It's like he's winning by default.
Exactly. And this then led to a fascinating discussion about the role of paid promotion and how it can shape the narrative online and even influence radio play.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting because we're talking about the power of money to control what people see and hear.
Right, and they specifically mentioned the possibility of paying for blog posts to ensure positive coverage of Drake's music. They even threw out a hypothetical figure like $30,000.
Wow, so they're saying that you can literally buy good press.
That's what they seem to believe, and they made a comparison to traditional advertising, where you have to disclose when you're being paid to endorse a product. They suggested that maybe there should be similar transparency when it comes to paid promotional content online.
That's a really interesting point because it raises the question of how much of what we see online is actually organic versus manufactured.
Exactly. And the speakers seem to believe that a significant portion of the initial buzz around a song or an artist could be attributed to paid promotion.
Wow, so it might not be as authentic as it seems.
That's the implication. And then they went on to talk about how this initial paid push can then create a kind of snowball effect where it eventually becomes more organic as more people jump on board.
So it's like planting a seed that you then carefully nurture until it grows into something bigger.
Right. And they even gave examples like how a song can suddenly blow up after being featured in an NFL commercial or something like that.
Okay, so we've got this whole layer of paid promotion potentially influencing things. But then the speaker also brought up this really important point about the broader cultural and racial dynamics at play.
Yeah, they felt very strongly that the climate of 2025 had a huge impact on how all this went down. They specifically pointed to that one line in Drake's track where he says to Kendrick, "You're trying to free the slaves."
Yeah, that line definitely sparked a lot of controversy.
And the speaker's interpretation was that this line basically put Drake on the wrong side of history at a time when there's this huge emphasis on Black empowerment and solidarity.
So it was like he was aligning himself with the oppressors in a way.
That's how they saw it, and they connected it back to those earlier criticisms of Drake, about his use of certain language and his perceived disconnect from certain aspects of Black culture.
Right, and they brought up his background, how he didn't necessarily come from the same environment as someone like Kendrick.
Exactly, and they even used this analogy of a slap boxer versus a gloved fighter to illustrate how their approaches to this whole exchange were just fundamentally different.
So they're saying that Drake was kind of out of his element in this situation.
Yeah, like he wasn't equipped to handle the kind of lyrical warfare that Kendrick brought to the table.
Okay, so we've got the paid promotion, the cultural context, and then there's this whole question of how the success of Not Like Us fits into all of this.
Yeah, because that song was undeniably a huge hit, but the speaker was careful to point out that they weren't just focused on the success of that one track. They were more interested in Drake's overall strategy and whether he was making the right moves for the long term.
So it wasn't just about winning this one battle, it was about winning the war, so to speak.
Exactly. And they used this funny analogy from the movie Next Friday, where they talk about that delayed get back, like how sometimes revenge takes time.
Okay, I see what they're saying. Like maybe Drake is just biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back.
Right. And they also talked about how music can become something much bigger than just a song when it taps into a larger cultural movement.
Yeah, like when it becomes an anthem for a whole group of people.
Right. And they used Beyoncé's Cowboy Carter album as an example. They said that album was this huge moment for Black women.
Right.
It really spoke to their experiences and their power.
Absolutely. But then they went on to say that Cowboy Carter didn't necessarily have the same lasting impact on mainstream culture as some of Beyoncé's other work.
Yeah, and they speculated that maybe it was because of the genre or maybe the marketing strategy wasn't quite right.
But Not Like Us seemed to have this much broader reach.
Right, and they gave all these examples like how kids were singing it and it was being played at block parties, and even Will Ferrell did a skit about it on SNL.
Okay, so it definitely transcended the typical hip-hop audience.
For sure, and the speaker had this message for anyone who was attributing the success of Not Like Us solely to paid promotion. They basically said, good luck trying to manufacture that kind of organic buzz.
Like, you can't buy that kind of genuine connection with the people.
Exactly. And in the end, they shared this one thing they wish they could have told Drake. They said, just release a great record and promote the hell out of it.
So simple, yet so powerful.
Right. They felt like Drake was overthinking things, getting caught up in all the drama when he should have just focused on the music.
Okay, so to wrap up this deep dive, we've covered a lot of ground. We talked about the initial shock, the idea of Drake needing to embrace the bad guy persona, the belief that he'll ultimately come out on top, and the critiques of his strategic decisions.
And we also explored this whole debate about paid promotion and how it can shape the narrative. And of course, we couldn't ignore the massive influence of the cultural and racial landscape in 2025.
Exactly, and our goal with this deep dive has been to really give you a clear understanding of the main perspectives that are driving this online conversation about Drake and Kendrick.
We've tried to cut through the noise and highlight the core insights that are relevant to our listeners.
And before we go, we want to leave you with something to think about. Given the power of both strategic marketing and that genuine connection with culture, what do you think is the more sustainable path to success as an artist today? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
See you next time.